Today we are starting a new chapter in mathematics, Goods and Services Tax, or GST for short. Now, tax is a big part of our lives. Now, you may have heard your parents, your neighbors, your friends, or if you go into a shop, the shopkeeper talk about tax. Now, this is a part of our everyday experiences. So, let's start this chapter by understanding what tax is and why we have to pay taxes. So, what is tax? Governments of countries, of all countries, provide certain essential services to citizens. Here are examples. Now, there are government schools that provide free education. You may have seen government schools in India that provide free education for all students. Governments of all countries provide free education through government schools. Then there is healthcare, government hospitals that provide free healthcare for citizens. Physical infrastructure. Now you can think of the roads, the airports, the ports, railway stations, and all of the physical infrastructure that you have in our cities that is provided by the government. Security services to keep us safe. It could be the police or the armed services, the army, navy, and air force, which keep us safe. All of these are provided for by the government. Or relief during natural calamities. It may be an earthquake or a cyclone which affects thousands of people, and relief has to be provided to them. So all of these require money, and it is the money that government spends on providing these services to citizens. How does the government receive money? The government receives money from citizens through the taxes that we pay. Now, every transaction involving goods or services incurs a tax. Now, what are goods? Anything you buy, a physical asset. It could be a washing machine, a car, a phone, or even a book or a pencil. Anything big or small is an example of a goods. What about services? When you ask for service from someone, it could be a repair person who's come home to repair your computer, or it could be a banking or finance professional who's helping with investments, or an insurance broker who's selling you an insurance product. All of these are examples of people who provide services. So every transaction that involves goods or services incurs a tax. Specifically, what is GST? Before we come to that, let us understand that there are two kinds of taxes, direct and indirect. Now, as the name suggests, direct taxes are those that we directly pay to the government. It is levied on the income of individuals or companies. So companies have to pay income tax, or individuals who earn salaries have to pay income tax. And that tax amount is based on the income of the uh, individual. So it is something that is based on the income of the individual. Indirect taxes are collected by the shopkeeper when you buy something in a shop, and that tax amount is then given to the government. So it is an indirect tax, and that tax amount depends on the transaction value. In, if you buy a car, the cost is much higher, and therefore the value of the indirect tax is much higher. If you buy a toothbrush, then the cost of the toothbrush is much lower, and therefore the tax is lower as well. So the amount of indirect tax that applies depends on the transaction value. In this chapter, we will specifically deal with indirect taxes. So what is GST? Now GST, or Goods and Services Tax, as the name indicates, covers goods, which is the sale of objects or material, and services. All of these transactions are covered by GST. Now GST was introduced in India in 2017, and it replaced all other previously existing indirect taxes. So GST is a kind of indirect tax, and GST is part of the one nation, one tax vision of the government. So let's talk about the three components of GST. The three components are, and it is very important to understand the distinction between these three components so that it helps us solve problems later. The three components are the central GST, which is called CGST. It is collected by the central government on transactions which happen within state borders. Now, there are two important things here. One is it is collected by the central government. So, the money that is collected as part of the CGST goes to the central government in New Delhi, in India. And this is for a transaction that happens between state borders. For example, I live in Karnataka, and if I make a transaction in Karnataka where the buyer and seller are both within one state, so this is a transaction which happens within state borders, then CGST is collected and given to the central government. What about state GST? Now, state GST is amount or a tax amount that goes to the state government, again on transactions which happen within state borders, inside a state. And the final component, integrated GST or IGST, is collected by the central government on transactions which happen across state borders, which means that the buyer and seller are not in the same state. The buyer is in, let's say, Karnataka, and the seller is in Maharashtra. So the transaction happens across state borders. So these are the three components, and you have to realize that different components may apply based on whether it is intrastate or interstate. So when a transaction happens within a state, like these two components are, we can call them intrastate. And when a transaction happens across state borders, we can call it interstate. So these are the three components of GST. Now, to illustrate what I just said with a simple example, let's look at this scenario where there is a transaction. Goods of rupees 18,000 are purchased within the borders of a state, which means it is one state inside a state. And if the GST is 18%, then let us see what the three individual components of GST are. So CGST and SGST, which are the central and state government components, these are the two components that we should consider. Because remember, this is a transaction which has happened within a state. So the 18% GST is split between central government 9% and state government 9%. So each gets 9% of the 18% collected. Because this is an intra-state transaction, integrated GST is 0. And that component applies only when a transaction happens between two states or across state borders. So 9% of 18,000 is CGST and 9% of 18,000 is SGST. And that's how we can calculate the three components of GST in this case. In a different situation, there is a transaction of 18,000 across state borders. So the GST rate is 28%, but the buyer is in one state and the seller is in another. So CGST and SGST are both zero, and the entire 28% tax is collected as part of IGST. 28% of 18,000 is 5,040, and that goes to the central government. Let's do a few simple practice questions so that you can get a better understanding of GST. Now here is a seller of machine parts who sells goods worth 54,000 to a buyer within the same state, and that is important to note. GST rate is 18%. Calculate the three components of GST and the total GST amount. Now, since this is an intra-state transaction, the GST rate of 18% is split equally between CGST and SGST components. So CGST gets 9% and SGST gets 9%. So 9% of 54,000 is rupees 4,860. And similarly, 9% of 54,000 here is also rupees 4,860. And we have discussed this before. In an intra-state transaction, the IGST component is zero. So the total GST component here is rupees. We just add CGST and SGST components and we get 9,720 rupees, and that's the uh, total GST component. Now, how do you calculate the total bill that has to be paid in this transaction? So the total bill in this transaction, the total amount to be paid, or the total bill including GST, simply becomes the selling price, which is 54,000, plus the tax component 9,720. So if you add these two, you get the total bill amount. Let's take a look at another simple scenario. A seller of ready-made clothes sells goods worth 36,000 rupees to a buyer in a different state. GST rate is 18%. Calculate the three components. Now in this case, clearly, because it is an interstate transaction, CGST and SGST are both 0. So this is equal to 0 and this is also equal to 0. That leaves integrated GST with the entire 18%. So the 18% GST is applied as part of IGST, which is 18% of rupees 36,000. And this is so that is the total GST amount in this interstate transaction. Now let's talk a little bit about discounts. Now discount is a term that we are all very familiar with. Now what are discounts? Discounts are reductions that sellers may offer to attract buyers. Now there may be an attractive discount on a phone, attractive discounts on clothes and apparel during Diwali season, during Christmas, during New Year. So we are all familiar with discounts. Discounts may come in other forms as well. Buy two shirts and get one free is another form of discount. Now, different kinds of discounts has been discussed in a different chapter of mathematics. Here, let us understand how we deal with discounts and then taxes in such transactions. So there is something called a MRP. Now, MRP stands for maximum retail price. Now, when you pick up a product in a shop and look at the price, that is usually the MRP, which is the maximum price at which that product can be sold. Now, any discount that the shopkeeper gives you will apply on that marked price. We can use MRP or marked price interchangeably because they usually refer to the same thing. So the marked price is the price which is marked on the product, and the discount applies on top of it. So let us see how we can calculate tax in that scenario. So the discount amount, let us assume that the discount rate is D% and the marked price is NP. If this is the situation, how do we calculate the selling price? And we have done this. You have solved such questions even in an earlier grade. The selling price, which is the marked price minus the discount amount, so this is what it is. You have to reduce the discount amount from the marked price to get the selling price. And how do you do that? Well, you can recall what you did in earlier grades. It is MP multiplying outside the brackets 1 minus discount rate, which is D% by 100. When you do this, you get the selling price. Now the tax applies on the selling price. It does not apply on the marked price. So if you have the selling price, now here as part of step 2, let us calculate the tax amount. So GST will be equal to the selling price plus the GST amount. No, so that is not right. So let me correct that. So the GST amount is equal to the selling price multiplied by GST percentage by 100. So that is how you can calculate the GST amount. So the total amount that has to be paid as part of this transaction becomes equal to so this is how you can calculate the tax in a situation where a discount applies. First, you reduce the discount amount from the marked price so that you get the selling price, and then the tax applies on the selling price. In this question, let us calculate the GST. Now, this question says that there are three kinds of machines, 1, 2 and 3, and one machine of each kind has been sold. The MRPs of these machines are different, the discounts that apply to these machines are different, and the GST that applies to these machines are also different. So how can we do this? The first step, if you remember, is to calculate the discount amounts and the selling price of each machine, and after that we can calculate the GST. So let's do that. So we have the three machines, and we have the MRPs of the three machines can be written here. So a tabular form makes it easy to keep track of what we are doing. And then let's calculate the discount by putting the discount percentage here. So this is the discount percentage or the discount rate, and using that we can calculate the discount amount. So the three machines cost 12,000, 15,000 and 18,000, and one machine of each kind has been purchased. The discount percentages are 20%, 10% and 12%. So the discount amount can be calculated as follows. In the first case, the discount amount is 20% of 12,000, and therefore the discount amount for the first machine becomes 2400 or 2400. For the second machine, the discount is 10% of 15,000, so the discount amount is 1500. Remember, this is the amount, so these can be expressed as rupees. And the last machine has a discount of 12%, and 12% of 18,000 gives us a discount amount of 2,160. From this we can calculate the selling price, which is the marked price minus the discount amount. So we get rupees 9600 or 9600 for the first machine, 13,500 for the second machine, and 15,840 for the last machine. So now that we have the selling price of each machine, we can calculate the GST. Now remember, in the question, the CGST was given as 6% for the first one, was given as 6% for the first machine, 6% for the second machine, and 9% for the third machine. Since CGST has applied, an equal SGST will also be applicable. That is, the state GST will be equal to the central GST. So we have 9. So the total GST in these cases will be 18%, 12% for the first two machines, and 18% for the last one. So this tax rate has to apply on the selling price. So we have to apply the tax rate on the selling price. So the GST amount is 12% of 9,600 for the first machine, and that is 1152. Remember, this is 12% of 9,600, and in the second machine it is 12% of 13,400. It is 12% multiplied by 13,400, and that is 1,620. And for the last machine, the tax will be 18% of 15,840, which is 2,851.2. So now that we have all of these, we can calculate the total bill amount. So if we add these three numbers, if we add these three numbers, this one, this one, and this one, you get the total selling price. And if we add these three numbers, we get the total tax. So by adding all six numbers here, we will get the total bill amount. The next question is somewhat similar. There is a wholesaler of ready-made garments in Bangalore selling goods to a buyer in Telangana. So what that is telling you is that it is an interstate transaction. It's going from Karnataka state to Telangana state. So IGST will apply, CGST and SGST will not apply. Those will be 0%. So he has sold shirts worth 36,000, trousers or pants worth 16,000, and skirts for 9,600. So how do we calculate the total GST amount? So we can create a similar table of shirts, trousers, and skirts, and the cost of the selling price of the shirts is 36,000. No information about discounts has been given, so we can assume that these are the amounts for which these goods have been sold. So 36,000 rupees of shirts, 16,000 of trousers, and 9,600 of skirts. Of course, these are in rupees, and we have the GST amounts of 18, 18, and 12%. So the GST amount can be calculated here. In the case of shirts, the GST amount is 18% of 36,000. So how do you calculate that? It is 18% multiplied by 36,000, which gives you 6,480. And for trousers, it is 18% of 16,000, which gives you 2,880. And in the case of skirts, it's 12% tax of 9,600, which will give you 1,152. So these are the tax amounts. So by adding these three numbers, this, and this, we get the total GST amount. So total GST will be the sum of those three amounts, and that is equal to 10,512. Of course, that is rupees. And you can add the total GST amount to the selling price and get the total bill amount. Now we come to another question, and this is a little bit different. So this has discounts as well. So there is a seller of machine parts in Delhi selling 50,000 rupees worth of parts to a buyer in Rajasthan. So clearly it is an interstate transaction. So GST is 28%. First, since a discount applies, let's find the selling price. So the marked price is 50,000 and discount is 8%. So using these two, we can calculate the selling price, and selling price is equal to the formula that I described to you earlier in the class, discount rate divided by 100, and this is in percentage, of course. So by doing this, we can calculate the selling price as 46,000. So this is the cost of the product after the discount has been applied. Since this is an interstate transaction, the IGST rate is 28%. Remember that CGST and SGST do not apply in this transaction. Therefore, and CGST so those two do not apply. So only IGST applies. So how do we calculate the GST amount? The GST amount is 28% of 46,000, which is equal to 1,880 rupees. So the total bill amount can now be calculated, and that is the selling price plus the total tax amount, and that gives us the total bill amount 58,880 rupees. That's the final answer. And this is how these questions can be done. First apply the discount, calculate the selling price, and then apply the tax. So this is a question which is slightly different from the ones before. In a transaction, the final total bill is 24,000. So when you say final total bill, it is inclusive of the tax amount. The GST applied was 18%, and a discount of 4% was also applied in this transaction. So what was the marked price of the goods sold? So this is a bit different from what we did earlier. So the total bill is 24,000. So how do we connect, or how do we relate the selling price to the total bill? So the total bill is equal to the selling price multiplied by 1 plus GST rate by 100, and this is a percentage. So this is the formula that I have introduced to you, and that is what we are using. This connects the selling price to the total bill. We know that the total bill is 24,000, and this is equal to SP multiplied by 1 plus 18 by 100. This is So this is what we have. Now it's quite easy to calculate the selling price from this. SP is equal to 24,000 divided by 1.18, and this gives us 20,338.98 rupees. So this was the selling price of the uh, service delivered, or of the goods sold. Now how do we compute the marked price? Remember, selling price is obtained after reducing the marked price by the discount amount. So we can use the relation marked price multiplied by 1 minus discount rate This basically says that when you reduce the discount amount from the marked price, you get the selling price. And this is the equation we will use. So the discount rate is 4%. So marked price into 1 minus 4 by 100 is equal to the selling price, and the selling price in this case we have computed is 20,338.98. This means that the mark price is 20,338.98 divided by 0.96. And where did I get 0.96 from? Well, 4 by 100 is 0.04 and 1 minus 0.04 is 0.96, and this leads us to the result that the marked price is 21,186 rupees and 44 paise. So we were able to work back from the GST amount to calculate first the selling price and then the marked price. The final practice question of this lecture. This again is a bit different from what we have done before. In a transaction with MRP 20,000 and a GST rate of 12%, the total bill including GST comes to 20,000 again. So what is the discount applied? Now this one, let's say, is the marked price multiplied by 1 minus discount percentage by 100. This is the selling price. We know that. So we can say 20,000, which is the marked price, this is our first equation, which connects the selling price to the marked price. The second equation connects the selling price to the GST. So the total bill is equal to the selling price, and added to the selling price is the GST rate. So we have the total bill is also 20,000. And the GST amount in this case is 12%, making it 0.12. So this is 1.12 times SP. So this is our second equation. Using the second equation, we can calculate the value of selling price. And how do we do that? So selling price becomes 20,000 divided by 1.12, giving us the selling price. So we will use this value in the first equation. So 20,000 divided by 1.12, which is the selling price, becomes equal to the left hand side of this equation. So let's use that. So remember, the first equation was 20,000 into 1 minus discount rate by 100 is equal to selling price. So using this equation, we can say that 1 minus discount rate becomes 1 by 1.12, and that is equal to 0.8928. and therefore discount rate one minus, and that is 0.1072 or 10.72%. So we were able to work backwards from the total bill amount using the GST rate to calculate the discount that is applied in this transaction. So let's quickly summarize what we have done in the first class on GST. I told you what tax is and why governments impose tax on people and companies, and government uses the money to provide essential services to the citizens of the country. Now GST is a tax regime that was implemented in India in 2017. It has three components: central GST, state GST, and integrated GST. The first two components apply in intra-state transactions when it happens within a state, and the last component only applies in interstate transactions. The second thing we discussed was about discounts. How do you account for discounts in such problems? Discount represents a reduction in the price at which something is sold. So you have to use the discount rate to reduce the discount amount from the marked price so that you get the selling price. So selling price is equal to marked price minus discount. You can apply the GST tax rate on the selling price. So these were the main points that we discussed today. We will talk more about this chapter in the next class. Thank you for watching.